Hi there, BookTube. It's the 1st of May and I haven't yet done a May TBR video because I'm just hopelessly behind with things. Life's been very busy one way and another with work, and then I've been away, and anyway, I'm jolly well going to do one even though it's a little on the late side. But it selfishly, it kind of helps me organise my own thoughts, you know, when I do a TBR video, or pile of possibilities, as people call it these days. No, I expect to read everything that I'm talking about here, so it is a TBR, I think. And there are, again, a load of nice booktube kind of reading events and readathon-y things happening in May. And as is now my habit, I'm using those to sort of pick up things that I want to read. But first, I'm going to say that there's a couple of bits of new fiction that I'm really keen to read this month that I've actually already got hold of, and I'm definitely going to read, even though they don't fit with anything, because you know life's not all about readathons. So, and the first of those is by John McGregor, Lean Stand Fall, and this came out last year, and I've been meaning to read it ever since it came out because John McGregor is a real favourite author of mine. Why is he a favourite author? I think because he writes fiction that's kind of in the experimental kind of area, loosely speaking, but not right off the wall. He writes about people in a really interesting way that I find acute and tender and thoughtful. So there we go. I'll let you know if it lives up to Reservoir 13, his last one, for example. The other one is Alice Smith's companion piece, and this is like hot off the press. You know, this is spring 2022 book, and I kind of have to read this because I so enjoyed Alice Smith's seasonal quartet, and this, as the name kind of implies, is something that kind of grew out of that project for her, and she sees it, I suppose, as a companion piece to those 4 novels. So I'm going to go for it. I love the covers. I love the David Hockney pictures on there. I went to a David Hockney exhibition in Saltaire in Yorkshire and saw all of these pictures that are used for the Alice Smith seasonal quartet covers, and now for companion piece as well. So those two. The other thing is I'm making sure that I try and read get a new country in most months this year. I haven't failed to do that last year. So by that I mean that I'm going to make sure that I read a book by an author who's an author from a place where I've never read something from an author from that country before. Gosh, I must find a less long-winded way of saying that. And the one that I'm planning to read is Reading the Ceiling by Dayo Forster. That came out in 2007, and it's a book from, Gambia. And so looking forward to that one. I also try and read some poetry every month, but because I've got quite a few other plans, the only there's 2 bits of poetry I'm committing to. One fits with one of the readathon prompts I'll come to in a minute, and the other is to finish the last 2 books of The Ring and the Book, which I've been reading since the end of last year with Kate Howe, and we've got just under 100 pages left to go, the last 2 sections, and this has been a real pleasure, but it'll also be great to kind of finish it and be able to move on to something else. That's the thing with long epic stuff, as it were. So I said that the other book of poetry I was going to read was going to fit with a readathon prompt, and that is this one, Scars Upon My Heart. Okay, and it's a book of women's poetry and verse from the First World War. So from which you may guess that the readathon I'm talking about is May of the Moderns, which is hosted by Margaret Pinard, and it's about reading things that were written between 1900 and 1945. She's got 5 great sort of prompts for that, 4 of which are from other booktubers, and one of whom is me. I was honoured to be asked. So I'm going to read things that fit in with about 3 of those 5 prompts, I think, or no, maybe 4 of them. The only one that I'm not doing is a really good prompt. It's the prompt black, and that's to read like kind of classic black literature, but it just happens that doesn't fit in for me this month. One of the prompts is War. That was set by Brian at Bookish, and to read things written by people who were actual sort of in the First World War as active participants, I suppose, whether, although, not necessarily as soldiers. And so this book of women's war poetry, there's a number of poets in here that kind of fit the bill for that one. Another of the prompts is sex, and a brilliant prompt, and about books that kind of look at or in some way illustrate the way attitudes to sex changed over the period of sort of the first half of the 20th century. And for that, I'm going to read Jacob's Room by Virginia Woolf. Now, I'll say more about this when I kind of come to the end of the month and talk about the book. But Woolf's kind of attitude to sex and the way it comes into her novels is subtle but interesting, and I think does illustrate how the shift, I suppose, that was happening in the first half of the 20th century around that. So Jacob's Room it is. This was a novel from, now, when was it published? 1922. And it's one that I've never read, although I know a little bit about it. So that was War and Sex. Okay. Now, and I've mentioned the prompt black, which I'm not getting to do. Margaret's own prompt is other, and that's to read a book in translation from the period. And cheating a little bit here, I'm going to count The Magic Mountain by Thomas Mann, which I've been reading in April, but I will finish in May. And obviously translated from the German. Very satisfying experience reading that, but it's such a long book, you need to spread it over a couple of months to so as not to just get bogged down by it or crash through it. The other, the book that I'm going to read for my own prompt also kind of meets other as well, because it's a book in translation, and that's Devdas by Sarat, Chandra, Chattopadhyay, and that was originally written in Bengali in 1917. Now, my prompt for May of the Moderns was Empire, and that was to read something either by a kind of an author from one of the imperial powers, but set in an imperial possession, a country that was part of someone else's empire, or to read a book by an author from somewhere that was part of someone else's empire at that time. And Devdas was written in Bengali by an author who was living under sort of British imperial rule. Looking forward to that one. Now, that's May of the Moderns, but Devdas and Sarat, Chandra, Chattopadhyay also fits another of this month's wonderful reading events, which is possibly a less known one, and that's Lit with Indian Lit, which is hosted by Sant Reads, and that's about getting us to read books by authors from the sort of Indian subcontinent that were not written in English, so written in any of the local languages, of which there are many, from all around India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the whole Indian subcontinent. And so Devdas hits the target for that, but I've got another book in mind for that as well, and that's 55 Pillars, Red Walls by Usha, Priyamvada, and that was written in Hindi in 1961, and it was quite a groundbreaking novel by a woman writing in Hindi, sort of talk about changing attitudes and so on, and the 1960s in India, really interesting time, and I'll tell you more after I've read it, but I'm excited by that one. If you've read it, do comment any of these. If you've read them and want to tell me more about them or your thoughts on them, or you're thinking of reading them too, please do comment. Now then, both those books also fit for the next reading event, which is the Asian Readathon. Now, that's a real biggie. The person who hosts it is Read with Cindy, and she's got like 1 million subscribers, you know, the sort of thing. So I don't engage really closely with that. But it just happens that I'm actually going to read 3 things that kind of fit with the Asian Readathon and her prompts. The 2 I've mentioned, and the 3rd is Disoriental by Negar Djavadi, who's an Iranian author. That came out in 2016, but that I'm really reading because it's one of the 2 books for April and May for gender librarians, LGBTQ books in translation book group. Well, Jen and Greg have supposedly found is kind of jointly doing it with her 2 now, and we it was sort of book 2 for that, and I'm very excited to read that because it was translated by Tina Cover, and I've seen Tina Cover talking about the book and how much she enjoyed translating it on Sean the Book Maniac's channel. So very keen for that one. So next on the readathon list is Maybe Midrash, which comes around every May, and that's hosted by Jason of Old Blues Chapter and Verse, and it's a readathon that I always try and take part in because it's one of those readathons that pushes me to read things that are perhaps outside my normal area of interest, because it's specifically about reading books that in some way deal with religion and religious faith, and the sort of the prompt is to read a fiction book that's got a strong religious content and a non-fiction one. Now I'm actually only going with the fiction one this year because I've got a couple of other non-fiction books to read, which I will come on to in a minute. But the one I've chosen is a book that I actually read when I was in my teens, and I've been wanting for some years to go back and revisit it, and that's In This House of Brede by Rumer Godden. It came out in 1969, so when I originally read it, it was a relatively recent book, but not now, obviously. And it's a book about, she wrote it not that long after she converted to Catholicism. I do remember it as having really strong religious content. It's about a kind of high-flying civil servant, I think she is, who kind of throws that in to become a Benedictine nun in a contemplative order. Yeah, looking forward to that, revisiting it and seeing if I enjoy it in the same way that I did when I was in my teens. I think I had a bit of a fascination with nuns then. Not in a bad way, you know, just like more like the whole idea of like shutting yourself away and just like praying and thinking and living in a women-only environment. Anyway, that's that one. Now then, 2 more super events this month, both of which I wouldn't have dreamt of missing out on. One is Springathon, which comes around every year and is always a joy. That's hosted by Heidi of My Reading Life, Doris of All the Books, and Natalie the Curious Reader, and that's about reading books about nature, and they do wonderfully kind of loose prompts that give you lots of scope. I think this year it's diversity, connectivity, sustainability, and activity. Well, I'm reading 2 non-fiction nature books, which, loosely speaking, fit. I can attach each of them to one of the prompts. One of them is Rachel Carson, Under the Sea Wind. Now she was real, she brought in a sort of new era, I suppose, of nature writing, and her most famous book would be The Silent Spring, you know, which was about the impact of insecticides and was groundbreaking and changed people's thinking. This one was, I think, her first book of nature writing, came out in 1941, and she's one of those writers that I feel like I can't believe that I've heard about Rachel Carson for so many years and never read anything by her. So that's Springathon is my my extra push to read this by her. I think I'll attach it to activity, I think, as a prompt. The other one that I really want to read is Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake, which is that the book came out in 2020 about fungi and mycology, and everyone is enthused about that book so much, and it fits beautifully with connectivity, doesn't it? So I'm really planning to get that one in May. And then last but by no means least, Katie of Books and Things likes to do some kind of different readathon each year, and this year she in the spring, because obviously she's involved in Jane Austen in July and Victober later in the year, and this year she's doing a historical fiction readathon, and I love historical fiction, so and I love Katie, so had to take part. Now again, she's got about 7 really nice, interesting prompts, but I'm just going to try and fit one of those, which is to read a work of historical fiction set in a different country from your own. And I'm going to use this again as an extra nudge to read a book I've been meaning to read for a few years, and that's Homegoing by Yaa Gyasi, which came out in, I think, 2016. And Gyasi is an American Ghanaian author, and this book is set in, well, what is now Ghana, but set, it covers about 300 years of history. It's a bit, different. It goes through different generations and so on. Everyone I've heard speak about it is enthused about it, so and it sounds like a real Roz sort of book. So that's my definite plans. The one thing there's 2 things that I haven't mentioned that I'm going to read. I will definitely read a graphic novel or piece of graphic non-fiction, but I haven't yet picked which. I thought I might let myself sort of browse the selection in my library this time and pick that more spontaneously. The other thing is the play, because Tilly and I try to read a play and do a discussing drama video each month. Now we're not actually sure that we're going to be able to do that this month because of plans that Tilly has, which I won't are hers to explain. But we are hoping, if we can, to read a book by a Ukrainian playwright, and I've been starting to sort of do a bit of research to find one, and I've found some that sound great, and then they don't appear to be available to buy in English, although they have been translated. So if anyone's got any inspiration for that, please share. There you go. That's my lovely, exciting May plans. I hope yours are equally wonderful.